Does God exist? People have been asking this question for hundreds of thousands of years. And if you look in either direction, you'll find people that are 100% sure that God does not exist. And you'll find people that are 100% sure that God does exist. First, let's start with the science. Contrary to popular belief, it actually is possible to create something out of nothing. So from a scientific standpoint, you can technically create a universe without some otherworldly being. However, what you can't do is unequivocally prove that God does not exist. But let's look at the math. If you have 0 and you want to create something, the first thing that you have to do is create a negative. So 0 equals -10 plus 10. You're still looking at a 0 sum, but you've created 10 by creating -10. So theoretically, it could be possible to create a universe if you could create a deficit first. Bear with me, because this gets really simple really fast. 0 is a state of balance. It's not a baseline. It's not a basement that can't go any lower, because we know that 0 can go to -1, -2, -5, -10. That means it can also go to 1, 2, +5, and +10. So you can maintain 0 by creating balance. -5 plus 5 equals 0. You have a +5, which could represent our universe, and -5 could represent what created our universe. All you would need is for something passive to create it, because initially there's nothing that exists that can create the universe, unless you believe in God. Now the conversation gets a little bit easier. And again, we've established that you cannot definitively prove that God does not exist. But where's the evidence? What suggests that God might exist instead of nothing at all? Laws, rules of science, things that don't make sense even on a fundamental level. The only thing that really makes sense about our universe is consistency. We see a lot of stars. We see a lot of planets. We see things work in a certain way. Atoms come together and form in a certain way. Energy moves in a certain way. If you burn a block of wood, it'll always turn into fire. But that's the only thing that truly makes sense about our universe, is the consistency of it. If you actually look at it on a fundamental level, none of it makes sense. None of these things could naturally develop unless they already occurred in the way that we observe them. So, if you see a new star form or a planet come together, you'll say those are the laws of nature and that's why that happened. But where do the laws of nature come from? Why does an atom stick together instead of falling apart? Why does gravity exist? How can space be moved and stretched? Why doesn't it stay in one place? These are all questions that can never be answered by science. No matter how long we go, no matter how much we observe, we'll never be able to explain why it worked this way in the first place. Because eventually, you have to come to the conclusion that someone made them work this way. Now, I'm not saying that that definitively proves that God exists, but I am saying that it begs the question. On a fundamental level, atoms are held together by something called the strong nuclear force. This strong nuclear force is what keeps quarks together so that they can form protons, neutrons. But where does that nuclear force come from? Quantum mechanics tells us that there's a field of energy that permeates our universe. Multiple fields, in fact. 17 fundamental fields that are necessary for everything in our universe to exist. And without them, nothing could work the way that it does now. But where do those fields come from? Many physicists agree that the God of the gaps is not a good reason to suddenly believe in God. Saying that there's no answers is not a good reason to immediately default to the idea that God exists. But I disagree, not with the unanswered questions sum. At some point, if you have unanswered questions that can never be answered, that's a good reason to believe in the possibility of God, at the very least. Now, some questions will have answers. Eventually, we will be able to figure out how most of our universe works. But some questions will never be answered, because fundamentally, they cannot be answered. So the answer to your undying question of whether or not God exists is I don't know.